plumber called me on a Tuesday morning, and the first thing he said was, "Sir, I need you to come over to your father's house. But don't come alone. Bring your son with you." I remember standing in my kitchen, still in my robe, holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. I asked him what was wrong. He paused for a second too long. "Just come, sir. There's something down here you need to see, both of you." My father had passed away 11 weeks earlier. 81 years old, a retired civil engineer from Dayton, Ohio, who built bridges for 30 years and spent his retirement tending a vegetable garden and watching the evening news. He died quietly, the way he'd always wanted, in his own bed. No machines, no fuss. That was my father. No fuss about anything. I'd hired a plumber to fix a slow leak in the basement before I put the house on the market. Nothing complicated. The house had been in the family since 1987, and the pipes were old. I figured it would take a few hours, maybe a day. That call changed everything. I called my son and told him to meet me there. He lives about 20 minutes from my father's old place in Kettering. I didn't tell him much on the phone because I didn't know much myself. I just said, "Something's come up. I need you there." By the time I pulled into the driveway, my stomach was tight in a way I couldn't explain. The house looked the same as it always had. White aluminum siding, black shutters, the big oak tree in the front yard my father planted the year I was born. My son's truck was already in the driveway. The plumber, a quiet man named Ray, met us at the front door. He was maybe 40, wearing a gray work shirt with his company name on it. And he looked uncomfortable in the way people do when they found something they weren't supposed to find. He led us through the kitchen, down the basement stairs, and into the back corner of the basement where my father kept his old workbench and tools. I'd been down there dozens of times over the years. I knew every shelf, every cabinet, every coffee can full of screws and bolts my father refused to throw away. Ray pointed to the wall behind the water heater. There was an opening there, not large, maybe 3 feet wide, 4 feet tall. The drywall panel that had always covered it was leaning against the adjacent wall. Ray said when he went to check the pipes behind the water heater, he accidentally pushed against it and it swung open. It wasn't nailed shut. It had a latch on the inside. I looked at my son. He looked at me. Neither of us had any idea that was there. I ducked through the opening. Ray handed me a flashlight, though there was already a pull chain light inside. I reached up and pulled it. What I saw was not a storage room. It wasn't pipes or ductwork. It was a small, clean space, maybe 8 feet by 6 feet, with a folding table, a metal filing cabinet, and a plastic bin with a lid. The floor was swept. There was a mason jar on the table with 3 pencils in it and a yellow legal pad. On top of the filing cabinet was an envelope. It had my name on it. My full name, written in my father's handwriting. My son came in behind me and put his hand on my shoulder when he saw it. I didn't open it right away. I stood there for probably a full minute, just looking at my name written in that familiar handwriting. My father had a very specific way of writing capital letters, tall and slightly tilted to the right, like he was always in a hurry to get to the next word. I'd seen that handwriting on birthday cards, on checks, on notes left on the refrigerator for 50 years. I sat down on the floor of that little room and opened the envelope. The letter was 4 pages long, handwritten on yellow legal paper. The first line said, "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm sorry it took me this long to tell you." I read it all the way through before I said a single word. My father had 2 sons, me and my younger brother, whose name I'll say is my brother because that's all he is to me now. A brother in biology only. I'm 63 years old. My brother is 58. For most of our adult lives, we've been civil. Holidays, phone calls on birthdays, occasional dinners when the whole family was together. We weren't close the way some brothers are, but I never thought we were enemies. My brother had always been the one my father struggled with. Not because my father didn't love him, he did deeply, but because my brother had a pattern of making bad decisions and then needing someone to clean up behind him. A failed business in his late 30s that my father quietly helped bail out. A divorce that left him financially unstable. A second business that did a little better, but still required my father to co-sign on a loan. I knew about the loan. I didn't know the full amount. According to the letter, the loan my father co-signed for was $160,000. My brother had originally told my father it was $80,000. My father only found out the real number when the bank sent him a statement 3 years later, by which point the business had already folded and my brother had moved on to other things, leaving my father legally responsible for the debt. My father paid it. All of it, quietly, over 7 years, using money he'd saved over decades of working, money he and my mother had carefully set aside for retirement. My mother had passed away 12 years before my father, and after her death, my father managed their savings alone. He paid off that debt at $1,900 a month for 7 years and never said a word to me about it. He didn't want to cause a problem between my brother and me. That was my father. He absorbed things so other people wouldn't have to. But that wasn't everything. After my father paid off the co-signed loan, my brother came back. This time it wasn't a business loan. My brother had been struggling with his mortgage, a house in Centerville he'd bought at the top of the market and couldn't afford to maintain on his income. He told my father he needed $40,000 to catch up on payments and make some necessary repairs, or he would lose the house. My father gave it to him. He transferred $40,000 out of his savings account in a single withdrawal. I found the bank statement in the filing cabinet. Then, a year and a half ago, my brother came back again. By this point, my father was in his late 70s and beginning to show signs of the cognitive decline that would eventually take him. He had good days and bad days. On his bad days, he was confused, sometimes disoriented, occasionally unable to remember recent conversations. My brother knew this. According to the documents in that filing cabinet, and there were many documents organized in labeled folders, held together with rubber bands, my brother had visited my father's house multiple times during periods when my father was clearly not at his best. My father's caregiver, a woman named Dottie who came 3 mornings a week, had kept a handwritten log of my father's condition at the start of each visit. Those logs were in the cabinet, too. My father had apparently asked her to keep them. My father had been planning this room for a long time. Among the documents was a copy of a power of attorney form that my brother had brought to my father's house for him to sign. The form would have given my brother full legal authority over my father's finances, his property, his medical decisions, everything. My father had signed it. But next to the signed copy was a letter my father had written to his attorney 2 days later, dated clearly, asking to have the power of attorney revoked. The attorney's response was in there too, confirming it had been revoked, and a new, updated document naming me as my father's sole agent had been filed and notarized. My brother had no idea the original form had been revoked. He thought he still had authority over my father's affairs. I found this out because the letter explained it. My father wrote that he'd signed the first form on a day when he was confused and frightened, and my brother had come over unannounced. He said he didn't realize until later what he had signed, and when he called his attorney to explain, his attorney helped him fix it immediately. Then my father wrote something that made me sit on that cold basement floor and press the back of my hand against my mouth. He wrote, "I know what your brother has been taking from me. I know he has been cashing checks from my account. I've been leaving small amounts in the checking account so he can access what he thinks I don't notice, while keeping the rest protected. There are bank records in this cabinet." I could not go to the police myself. I was afraid of what would happen to the family. But I want you to know. And I want you to have everything you need to do what's right, if you decide it should be done. My son was reading over my shoulder. He said, "Dad," in a voice I hadn't heard from him since he was a child. I looked at the bank records. Over the course of 14 months, my brother had made unauthorized withdrawals from my father's checking account totaling $23,400. Some were electronic transfers. Some were checks that had been written in my father's name and cashed. My father had flagged each one with a yellow sticky note indicating the date, the amount, and a brief note about whether he could account for it legitimately or not. Most of them he could not. In the corner of the room, the plastic bin contained a digital voice recorder, sealed in a Ziploc bag. There was a note taped to it in my father's handwriting. Last conversation with your brother. November 12th. My father had died on January 3rd. My son picked up the bin, and we stood together in that small, cold, underground room that my father had built in secret in his 80s while managing his own declining health, and we listened to the recording. My brother's voice was very clear. He had no idea he was being recorded. The days that followed were not what I expected. I expected anger. I had anger, enough of it to keep me awake for 3 nights in a row, staring at the ceiling of my bedroom. But what I felt more than anger was grief. A different kind of grief than what I'd felt when my father died. This was grief for the version of my family I'd believed in, the story I'd told myself for 60 years about who we were. I called an elder law attorney on the Thursday following Ray's phone call. I brought everything, the files, the bank statements, the letter, the recording. The attorney, a woman who had been practicing in Dayton for over 30 years, reviewed everything methodically over 2 appointments. At the end of the second appointment, she set her pen down, looked at me, and said, "Your father built a very solid case." The unauthorized withdrawals from my father's account constituted elder financial abuse under Ohio law. The false power of attorney, while it had been revoked before any real damage was done, was still relevant to the pattern of behavior my brother had established. The recording was admissible. The bank records were thorough. My father's written documentation, organized and dated, was, in her words, meticulous. She said my father had clearly understood exactly what he was doing. I think about that a lot. My father, with his good days and his bad days, his confusion and his moments of clarity, sitting at that folding table in a room no one knew existed, documenting everything he could, making sure someone would know the truth when he was no longer here to tell it. I asked my son not to tell anyone yet. Not his wife, not his kids, no one. I needed a few days before the world outside my own chest knew what I knew. On the second week, I drove to my brother's house. He lives in a beige colonial in Centerville, the same house my father helped him save. His car was in the garage. I knocked on the door, and when he answered, I could see right away from his face that he had no idea why I was there. He smiled, started to say something about the estate paperwork, about when we were going to start sorting through my father's things. I told him we needed to talk. We sat at his kitchen table. He had coffee going. The radio was on. Something low in the background. He looked relaxed, a little impatient, the way he always looked when a conversation was taking longer than he expected. I put the envelope on the table. Not the letter, just the bank records. The 14 months of flagged statements. He looked at them for a long time without speaking. Then he said, "Dad said I could have that." I waited. He said it again, louder. "Dad said I could have it. We had an arrangement." I asked him to explain the arrangement. He couldn't. He shifted in his chair, picked up his coffee cup, put it back down. His face changed in a way that's hard to describe. It was like watching someone realize they'd been walking toward a cliff they thought was still far away. I told him about the attorney. I told him about the recording. I didn't play it for him. I didn't need to. He sat quietly for what felt like a very long time. Then he said, "What are you going to do?" I told him I was going to do what my father asked me to do. What was right. The investigation took 4 months. My brother retained his own attorney, which complicated things. There were conversations I had to stop having with him on advice of counsel. There was a period of several weeks where we did not speak at all, and I would sometimes drive past our father's house. The house was still in the estate, still on the market, and feel the weight of everything that had happened in that basement. The elder financial abuse charge was filed. My brother did not go to trial. His attorney negotiated a plea agreement that required him to repay the full $23,400 to my father's estate, complete 200 hours of community service, and serve 3 years of probation. He did not go to prison, which was something I had conflicted feelings about. But the attorney said the restitution and the record were what mattered. The money would go back into the estate, back to where my father had intended it to go. My father's estate, once everything was properly settled, came to me. There was no updated will to complicate things. My father had updated it years ago after the first major loan situation to name me as the sole beneficiary, with a small specific bequest to a local charity he'd supported for decades. My brother had apparently assumed he was still in it. He wasn't. The house sold in March. I was there for the final walkthrough, and I walked through every room one more time by myself before the new owners took possession. I went down to the basement last. The room was still there. I'd left it exactly as my father had arranged it. The filing cabinet, the folding table, the mason jar with the pencils. I hadn't been able to bring myself to dismantle it yet. I stood in there for a few minutes with the pull chain light on. The yellow legal pad was still on the table, blank except for the faint impression of my father's handwriting from the pages he'd written on and removed. I think about what it cost him to build that room, not in money, in everything else. The effort of keeping a secret, the weight of knowing what his son was doing and choosing for a while to manage it quietly rather than blow up the family, the discipline required to document everything carefully on days when his memory wasn't reliable, the love required to write a letter he hoped I would find and act on, even though he wouldn't be there to see what happened next. My son called me the evening after everything was finalized. He asked how I was doing. I told him I was okay. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Grandpa knew exactly what he was doing, Dad." He was right. My father built bridges for 30 years. He knew how to construct something solid and lasting, something that would hold weight long after the work was finished. I thought I knew my father. I thought I understood the shape of his life. But he had a whole room inside himself I had never seen, a room where he kept the truth, organized and patient, waiting for the right time. He built it for me, and when I needed it most, it held. I keep thinking about that pull chain light, the way it clicked on and flooded that small room with yellow light, and everything my father had quietly built, not just the room itself, but the truth inside it, was suddenly just sitting there waiting for me. My father never asked anyone to admire him for what he did. He never complained about the $160,000 he spent cleaning up after my brother. He never told me what my brother was taking from his checking account month after month, because he didn't want to put that weight on me before he had something solid to show for it. That's the thing about integrity. Real integrity, not the kind people announce, but the kind that functions quietly in the dark. You don't see it until you're standing in a cold basement holding a flashlight, and then you see it everywhere all at once. What my brother did had a cost. Not just the money, though the money was real and the restitution order made that official. The deeper cost was what he lost that can't be ordered back. There's a kind of reckoning that happens when the people who love you finally see clearly who you are, and there's no document, no attorney, no plea agreement that reverses it. My brother made his choices over many years, in small increments, each one probably feeling manageable at the time. That's how it usually works. You don't decide to become the kind of person who steals from an elderly father all at once. You just keep choosing the easier wrong thing until one day, that's the only version of yourself that exists. I don't say that with satisfaction. I say it because it's true, and because I think about it when I'm tempted to take a shortcut, to let something slide, to tell myself it doesn't matter. It always matters. The record always exists somewhere, even when no one is keeping it. My father understood that. He didn't just document my brother's actions, he documented his own. Every decision he made carefully, deliberately, with a clarity that his age and his health had no right to leave him. The fact that he still had that clarity, that he had the presence of mind to build that room, to keep those logs, to record that conversation. That's not luck. That's a lifetime of practicing clear thinking even when clear thinking is hard. And then there's what it cost him to hold all of that alone. To know what his son was doing and choose, for a time, to manage it carefully rather than blow up the family. To absorb that quietly and keep building the case, that kind of endurance, sitting with hard knowledge and not letting it crush you, not letting it make you bitter or reckless, that doesn't come easy. He earned that in 30 years of building bridges, in the slow, patient way he did everything. I think about what I want to leave behind. Not money, not property. The house sold. The estate is settled. What I want to leave is a record worth finding, the kind that, if someone opened it in a cold basement someday, would tell them exactly who I was and what I believed and what I chose to do when it mattered. My father built bridges. He knew the only ones worth building are the ones that hold.